Hoi allemaal. Ik ga in Engels praten als mijn Nederlands is niet zo goed. Maar jullie kunnen ook in Nederlands vragen, helemaal goed. So thank you for your patience. Well, I can first start by introducing myself and why I am here, because also it is a question I asked myself, because I'm not an art historian, I'm not from the art background, but I'm a heritage expert. And actually, my training is in architecture, so I work with mostly the built heritage, both historic buildings and also like more landscapes and sites, cities as well. So actually, the scope or the scale that we work and engage with is a bit different than individual artworks, but yet there are also a lot of common points where we can also look into the land artwork. And actually, I work at TU Eindhoven. I'm an assistant professor there, and I work on the topic of heritage and climate change, and also to better understand actually the intersection between heritage and climate change, and not only to see the impacts of climate change as something that really affects heritage, that heritage is something that is vulnerable, but also heritage can be part of the solution. It can also help us co-create future scenarios together with different stakeholders, together with different communities to find some answers, to find some future scenarios together. And so I think the reason why I'm here is to bring in a more heritage perspective into the whole debate, into the whole discussion. And thank you very much for this invitation for all the organizers. It's been very informative. Also to see the distinction between looking into the art world, but looking into the heritage world. I mean, there are a lot of also common points and distinctions, so it was very eye-opening for me. And the case studies have been very interesting, so thank you very much. So maybe I can start with the broad context, the definition of heritage, so that we can be on the same board on what it entails and how it also actually embraces the land artwork. So heritage is defined both as a product, but also as a process that provides societies with both tangible and intangible resources that are inherited from the past, but also created in the present and bestowed for the benefit of the future generations. So in its wide context, heritage is not only limited to physical artifacts or the built environment or the built heritage. Actually, so it's not only limited to the artworks, the objects that we see, or like the building structures that we see. It is more than that. It also includes natural and intangible dimensions, such as the landscape and also its relationship with water, the biodiversity, but also the values and meanings attached to it. So also the way that the societies, have a relationship with it, the way they comprehend it, they connect with it, it's also an important part of heritage. And I think it's also something maybe we should also take into account when we are discussing the land artwork. Because of course, they are very important, artworks or products of the artists themselves, and they have been created by this very renowned land artists. But what is also kind of important is to also see how their artistic messages are conveyed into the communities, into the wider society, and how actually it also changes over time. So when we think about the land art Flevoland, because when we are working with heritage, what we usually do is first we try to identify the values and meanings that are attached to it. And so, I try to do a bit the same for the land art in Flevoland. Of course, this is just, some ideas. I'm very eager to hear also what you can adapt to that. But of course, one of the biggest significance is that its connection with the landscape and how it shapes it, how it redefines the landscape, its connection with the nature and the environment. Next, of course, it's artistic value, because, as I said, the artists are very important here. And today we keep repeating the names of the artists. You never do it for an architectural object or built heritage. Most of the time, you don't even know the architect himself. Or when you want to make a change in a building, you never consult the architect. Who created it in the first place. It's usually a bit of a different context. But, for these artworks, of course, the artist and also the message that the artist want to convey is a very essential part of it, something that we always have to keep in mind. And also it has a very historical value, not because that it's very historic, no, these land artworks are also quite recent, but they're an important part of the post-560 history and heritage of this region, of the province of Flevoland, and also its historical context, the land reclamation history, the landscape history that we talked about today. It's also very intrinsic part of it. So it's also something that we have to think about. And then next, of course, these are the materiality and the structural integrity of them is also very important. How they formed shape, how they take into shape, how they have been created. It's also an important part of this heritage. But also something that I want to add is also the communal value. The title of today is also mentions levend erfgoed, the living heritage aspect. So living heritage means that these historic places, they are also living essential parts of the community. So there's also the community aspect here. And also for the land artwork, I think it's also important to identify the communal value, that the people visiting it or the people living in nearby, what kind of meaning they attach to it. And it can be also very different than what the artist wanted to maybe convey at the first place, but also it's maybe important to take into consideration, what the people visiting it in their everyday life. For instance, for the Broken Circle, it was mentioned that it was part of an industrial landscape, that there were workmen who was working in the environment, and actually the Broken Circle was in their everyday view. So what was their interpretation of it? Maybe also it's something important also to keep in mind when talking about maybe the future scenarios about this site. Of course, each land artwork is very unique with these different values and different memories and messages that are attached to it. And they also have a very varying lifespan. Just also adding up to all the discussions today, of course, their lifespan varies from more ephemeral to more permanent. And of course, it depends on whether or not you take certain actions to preserve them, to elongate their lifespan, or you preserve not to do that. Also, I'll come to that in a bit later. But for instance, when we think about the Broken Circle, just what we have seen today, it has changed over time in the past 50 years. And with the different water levels, with the weathers, the season, so it has actually its original context or integrity has changed over time. And we don't know how it will change further in the next 50 years or 100 years. On the other hand, for instance, the Groene Cathedral, it was created to last for centuries. So it was created to create a wildlife habitat for that space, and also it produces oxygen for the province. So it has a different lifespan that was meant to be. So again, the lifespan that was intended and that really actually happens or takes place in real are quite different. But just like every built structure, of course, the land artwork also decays. We can see it when we visit it. So, decay is natural part of these artworks. When you put something outside, of course, the material will degrade. Metal corrodes, concrete erodes, and timber rots. So all these materials, they have very limited lifespans. So of course you can take some measures in order to prevent it, in order to test how they last, but it also, you cannot prevent degradation happening. So it's also an intrinsic part of it. So it's also something you always have to keep in mind. And there are different environmental conditions that triggers it or that accelerates it. And also, of course, human-induced interventions also kind of can harm these artworks. We just seen very interesting examples from Middelheim, of course, it can be graffiti, it can be, thank God that these are located in remote locations so that people do not really too much damage them. There are also different ways of damages that can happen. But climate change also can accelerate natural degradation processes. Due to climate change, during winter months, heavy rainfalls and rising water levels, they can really cause flood risks, for such sites, and it can be temporal, it can be more permanent, gradual, and also again, rising temperatures and drought are also again climate risks for the Netherlands during summertime, and these also can accelerate natural degradation process for these land artworks. For instance, I come from TU, so of course I'll show you some maps and things, but I mean, I'll just facilitate to you. So this is a flood risk map for the province of Flevoland. And there, actually, you can see the land artwork exposed on it. And what you see in this map as the blue or bluish areas, they are of places with flood risks. And we can see, for instance, exposure is situated right there with the very immediate water level risks. And also, for instance, of course, the sea level. Of course, there's also very serious flood risk in very, very near future. So these are also things that we have to keep in mind. So, I mean, it is very probable that in 20, 30 years, the feet of the exposure will be submerged in water. So it's also something to keep in mind. I mean, when you're thinking about the feature of it. Or with the sea level, we can see how close it is to the water body. And even this foreyear, when the water levels were very high, it was quite a big risk. So what to do against it? Also something to think about. And here is another map, again taken from Klimaateffect Atlas. And this shows the drought risk. Again, for the province of Flevoland. And what you can see with yellow or orange are the places with more drought risks. And again, imposing the land artwork on it, you can see, for instance, the RCE and also the observatorium. They are in locations with high drought risks. So how it affects these artworks is, of course, you can see they are all green. So they have vegetation on them. So what happens if the temperature levels are rising and also there is a high drought risk, then they all dry out during summer and they have a yellow appearance. So how will it affect its overall aesthetics if it's all yellow? The Groene Cathedral is Gele Cathedral, and then what will happen? So yeah, also these are things. Sorry for my bad pronunciation. But I mean, this might be the scenario for 4 or 5 months every summer I'm starting from 2030. I mean, these are real risks. So what comes next, keeping in mind these current threats, is whether to, so what to do? What is the future of these land artworks and how we can approach it? And also thinking that there is no one-size-fits-all for these works. So they are all very unique with its materiality, with its structural integrity, with its artistic messages, its values, but also, what is really thought about that. And of course, there are different considerations to keep in mind. And I know the image on the left is a bit controversial because it's located in an indoor environment. So I put it there intentionally. I'll come to that, what I mean by that. So, of course, there are different ways of thinking, and I just want to bring into you some ideas that comes from more critical heritage scholars as well, into ways of thinking about the future of such artworks. So the idea of curated decay was initially introduced by Kathleen de Silvey. She's a Scottish scholar, heritage scholar. And so this book was quite sensational in the heritage world when it first came out. And actually it was very quickly also spotted by critical heritage thinkers and scholars, because her idea was this. And it's also quite similar to Smithson's anthropic interest, by the way. So if you just acknowledge change and let materials, structures, artworks decay, and if you do not do anything, if you do not take any measures against this decay or its weathering, then it will take alternative forms and alternative formats. And her question was this: what if we see it as not something diminishing or destructive, but as something additive? So it's something that adds an alternative form, alternative identity, alternative means of being to these structures. And it quite aligns with Smithson's entropy idea, of course, because what if we, because also other heritage scholars later claim that, I mean, the idea of conservation is very much 20th century, so that we want to preserve these structures in their original format that they happened like years ago, but what if we just allow them to change? And wouldn't they multiply in different formats? They would just have different identities, different memories, and different ways of being. And we just acknowledge it that we acknowledge it's part of the process, but not as something only limited to the structure. So, of course, this is very controversial. I just put it out there. I mean, not that it should be also acknowledged or that it should be implemented, but like a way of thinking in regards to curating the decay. So let's see, we just saw the sea level and the Lincoln, for instance, on the concrete walls. So what if we just let it, take its shape, other microorganisms taking toll on the concrete, and then it's getting a yellowish, greenish, different way of organisms, different way of living on itself, that it will just be a different format, a different way of descending, and maybe in like centuries later, it will just become part of the landscape itself as it is. Just a way of thinking, of course. And of course, the other alternative is preserving it, conserving it so that it is not damaged, it is protected, and it lasts, and that we elongate its lifespan. And of course, again, there is no one-size-fits-all approach for conservation. And today, it has been very informative also to see how different restoration actions were taken for sea level, all the meticulous work that you have done, the research, the different trials on the material to see what works, what doesn't. It's a very tedious process, of course, and then it's very unique to each artwork. So when there is no like a recipe that can be implemented for different buildings, because their material structures differs, the degradation process differs, and there are many different indicators, different measures you have to keep in mind. But of course, it depends, it changes based on the level of intervention that you can implement. Also, conservation is not just one approach. There are different levels of intervention you can implement. So ranging from just maintenance and small repairs here and there, when there's a graffiti, like painting on it, or, when there's some materials corroding, just fixing them. Or, of course, you can take more larger interventions, ranging from, rebuilding some parts of it or full reconstruction even. And these are also maybe things that you have to consider. What if, the concrete has a very limited lifespan. It's like 50 to 100 years. So would the other option be just demolish it and then maybe rebuild it? Is it an option or not? Is it something that we want to do? How much it will affect its authenticity, its integrity? Again, things to consider, and changes for every structure. And also one of the things that made me think today during the discussions, especially regarding climate change, and when we were talking about also the broken circle. So, especially Robert Smithson's interventions, and I'm not an art historian, so I have very limited knowledge on artworks, but these are very large interventions on the nature. So actually, we know that the Spiral Jetty, it took more than a year to be constructed, and it's in a very remote place. So think about the carbon footprint that it had created during the construction of this artwork. So, if he were to be living in this century, would he still do such a large intervention? Probably not. Probably he would have different consideration. Of course, this is only my opinion, but probably he would have different considerations over the context of climate change. So, not in regards to only how climate change impacts these artworks, but how can they actually contribute to maybe raising awareness about climate change, and also maybe some other things. And would Smithson still build such huge infrastructures if he was to be living in 21st century? Something also to think about. So Also, the level of interventions you can make. So is like demolishment and rebuilding an option for these artworks, for instance. There are a lot of different things that you have to keep in mind, a lot of different considerations. And also, one thing that I also want to, another perspective or another method that I would like to point out in regards to conserving these artworks or expanding their lifespan is how to make documentations and actually how to make their lifespan longer by documenting them. And we know that these artists have been using very different visual or video recordings or written assignments regarding their artwork so that their legacy and their interpretations could last for longer times. And then many of the artists have used actually this kind of reproductions, this kind of documentations as part of their artwork. And we can now see how Spiral Jetty was built by his movie, or read about all the other artworks. So documentation is also a way of conserving them, even if they do not any longer exist in future. And it's most of the time also the intention of the artist to use this kind of visual documentations to make them last longer. But there's only 3D documentation can also be used for managing change on the structures as well. So to monitor the decay, for instance, documentation like using drone imagery from aerial view, we know that they do it for Spiral Jetty. Or here you can see photogrammetric images being taken from land art, Flevoland, in order to document their current state of art, so that also how much they decay can be observed over time, and this documentation could be repeated over certain periods, so that how much they are damaged, how much they are changed can be understood. But this kind of 3D documentation can be used also for education purposes, for instance, for raising awareness. So let's say in 20 years when the exposure's feet will be underwater, or maybe when in 50 years, the broken circle will no longer be visible, just a hint of the circle maybe. Why not use your mobile phone and just scan a QR when you go to the place and look at the augmented reality version of it, or a virtual reality version of it. And actually, these digital innovations already exist. I mean, we already do that. We already produce this kind of 3D documentations, and it's also a way of maybe preserving the legacy, maybe not exactly the physical structure, but also the artwork in different formats, in different reproductions, in different alternative ways of being. So again, going back to the question of what's the future of these land artworks, and again, looking from a heritage and climate perspective, sometimes loss is inevitable, and that we have to acknowledge change. We have to acknowledge that these structures will change over time. They already have been changing over time. They will be changed over time as well, and they will be maybe damaged permanently. They will be lost permanently. So what to do? Of course, one way of creating the decay might be one way to approach it. Conserving it so that it lasts longer, that it maintains its original integrity, its original shape is one way to approach it. Or just maybe creating alternative visual recordings of them, documentations, so that they can last for centuries, even when they are long gone, is also a way of doing it. So I just want to here bring in some different ways of thinking, looking from a more heritage perspective, of course. Thank you for your understanding, and thank you for listening to me in English. I hope it's not a problem.
Did you know that Anthony Cormier, the man who made exposure, would actually be fine with wet feet on the sculpture, or that it would change according to climate change? Because he said, should the rising of the sea level mean that there has to be a rising of the dike? There should be a progressive burying of the work. So he's adapt.
So he's in favor of it then?
Yes, he would be in favor. I don't think he would mind much.
Then it's a good thing. But of course, the thing is, it's made of metal, and metal corrodes.
Sure.
So it can affect the whole structure. I mean, if the metal or the basement continues to corrode underwater, then what would it mean for the upper part?
So probably fall over
at some point. or you just find ways to conserve it in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. In many cases, so land art bring experience, and how do you see the special thing that the embodied education value comes out of the land art, and how to balance it? Maybe not too straightforward, not too direct. Kind of, there's a delicacy and there's a sadness in it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the education value, you mean education on art history or art education, or about more?
Yeah, maybe for, like you said, climate change awareness, maybe on that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we all see, when Venice is flooded often, that it creates quite a mass media outpour, or, when a disaster strikes heritage sites, it creates a massive interest from mass media, from people to conserve and preserve it. So people kind of attach this kind of, acknowledge heritage as part of their identity. So that's why they want to preserve it, they want to conserve it. So in that sense, it can definitely be used as a way of raising awareness, and we see it all around with different artworks, especially in Venice. There are a lot of different artistic expressions, where politicians are submerged underwater or things like that. So it can definitely be used to raise more awareness. I mean, with exposure, having its feet underwater, I think it will create convey a different message regarding that. Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Hele kathedraal also.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you recommend artists to make statements beforehand how to deal with these issues? Because that might help in thinking as a collective how to deal with that. How to read it otherwise.
Yeah, good question. I think some artists already do in terms of thinking about the lifespan of their work and whether or not they allow it to be conserved or to be about longevity about their work. But of course, I mean, like in 1970s, nobody knew that much about climate change. So, and also it has increasing cumulative effects now. So, I mean, we can foresee certain, certain impacts. For instance, I mean, we can use this kind of mappings to see, okay, there's a flood risk for this certain artwork or things like that. But again, things are shaping or changing very rapidly. And now we are even at 1.2 degree temperature rise from the pre-industrial levels, which was not foreseen for 2023 or 24. So it has more cumulative effects. Things are changing very rapidly. So I don't know whether maybe the artists could really foresee what would happen. But I think they can maybe think about ways, what will be the future of my artwork and how would I want it to be, have a future, to be conserved or to be allowed to be changed or maybe documented in different ways, taking every year certain photographs of it, and that it can create a kind of a series of recordings of it in a way. Yeah.
Well, I would say that the funny thing is that most of the land art that is produced for Flevoland is about awareness of being there and in what kind of a way do you want to live, or can you feel where you are? Especially here at sea level, it's quite clear, and also the Gormley statue, it's all about awareness. So in that case, the artists are already doing their best to show the public, rethink your positions, and
I agree. I definitely agree. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and maybe to continue also on your question, it's a thing that I do now standard in the museum also in our pre-acquisition research, discuss the future of this work, and sometimes they choose for replication or the text, how you can print it every year, or let it agree to do not touch, or it should be in storage after 3. So we want to know this before we acquire now. It makes the work more manageable, I think. It's necessary also, especially as a public institution.
But what we see here also, that the gallery has a certain value in re-establishing the work, because it creates the value of the market.
Sure.
And this is a factor which is also present.
Absolutely, yeah. That's why you need a lot of people in the discussion, I think, and a lot of perspectives. Ja.
Dit is in de groene kathedraal, where the Marines Busham originally said, just let it rot. If a tree falls over, don't replant it, it's temporal. But now he came back to it, to say, let's fix it up again.
We have the same experience. Artists change ideas as well. And then we get the interviews in the protocol, and they say we have to do this, and then 5 years into, no.
No, it's also because they didn't know at the time that it would become such an iconic work. So once they're, they change over years, and
of course.
I won't say they artists degrade as well, but they do tend to. Well, then when they look back on their life, on their oeuvre, then they tend sometimes to change them.
And also communities embrace the work. That is also a process of.
But Marines Busham made that artwork to degrade. In 30 years, he expected the trees to disintegrate, and they did start doing that, but it took longer. And then he came back with it. So maybe those are issues.
Why did he came back? Did he explain why?
It's exactly what Simone is saying. There's different reasons. He said there's a community now and people around it, and it should be enjoyed longer. He also said when I had this. First he said, I'm not sure if I ever said that so loudly. And then he said, when I said that I was very young myself, I didn't know what aging was.
Yes.
And now I'm getting older, and sometimes, your hip hurts or something, you go to the doctor and they say, okay, it's longer with a new hip, but let's do it. So he said that also changed.
No, but the perspective changes because when artists are younger, I'm generalizing here, sorry. They always sort of think of the next work. And it's only at a certain age, and I think it's very human to sort of start looking back and then see what are really important works, and then you start changing your mind. And it's difficult if you put down a protocol saying it should decay or it should do this or that. I have a question. I was triggered by if you introduce the idea of curating decay, which is not just about decay, because the term curating means that you allow a certain, or you select way of decay, and maybe not every spontaneous decay which happens. I was curious if that's because we can say, well, we don't mind if exposure is has its feet below water level or sea level, but maybe we say when it gets to the head, we say no, that's no, we won't be here. I know we won't be here.
Indeed, I think, I mean, the same thing that, I also talked about sea level when we visited. So, there is already some lichens on the top sides, they created like a yellowish, greenish, like different microorganisms on top of it. So maybe the artist might say, this is another living form. This adds to the structure. So I want to keep that, but not the graffiti. And he went that. So just, if there is like some graffiti or if the concrete corrodes or something. So do something for that, but make that living organisms survive. So that might be also a way to approach curation part of it.
Someone, if you introduce this curated decay, someone has to do the curating.
And I wonder if you discriminate between a natural agent of deterioration and a human. Like vandalism is considered negative. The graffiti is considered negative. We have one work in the collection where Anne-Veronica Janssen said, keep the graffiti, I like it on my work. So, would you discriminate between the human and non-human agents of deterioration in positive or negative?
There are different ways of doing it. So in the book, actually, she first introduces the theory of it, or like the idea behind it, and then she introduces many case studies. And in some of the case studies, for instance, it was a barn in the United States, it was 150 years old, unused for like 30, 40 years already. A lot of things have started degrading, timber, starting bolting and everything. So it was also an idea about what to create there, or shall we really create it, or what to create, what to just dispose, because also a lot of was trash, basically. So, I mean, and the artist also explains it was really difficult or the creator also explained it was very difficult to make this distinction, and then they chose these natural elements that they want to keep it, but not the maybe the more later interventions of change, or if there are some like additional interventions maybe on the structural buildings, they want to get rid of it, but just want to keep the natural elements of the renovation. But I mean, there were different approaches in different case studies, so I think it will depend on the artwork as well. Anyway. Yeah.
It was very interesting when Martina and I were at the Spiral Jetty. We made this travel through America. You can also read our reports on the Land Art Lives website. But we came there, and you see that the Spiral Jetty, Robert Smithson really thought this work should be left to nature and all the elements. He didn't want any intervention on conserving the work. And it has been on the water for 20 years. I think in 2000 it came, yeah, how do you say it? The water was low. But what we saw, and what we also heard, what is the problem now, is that people take stones. And this, I think, now they are thinking at the DRR Foundation and all the caretakers what to do now. And I think it's also an interesting.
Works become iconic.
Yeah,
they will take us through here.
Yeah. When nature takes, it's okay. When humans take, it's not.
Oh, well, yeah, do we have an answer? But it's going to disappear. If people keep on taking the stones, you will not be able to experience it anymore.
Bring the stone.
Distribute.
Yeah,
You're not allowed to.
Yeah.
It's forbidden.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's gone.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the discussion.